So, hello everybody. This is my Zoom presentation of narcissistic personality disorder. My name is Nicole Martinez. I first off want to apologize to Dr. Bauer and to my classmates. I became very ill and had to have surgery, so that's why this is late. So, again, this is my topic is narcissistic personality disorder, which is one of the personality disorders. And then we'll move to slide number 2. So there are 3 clusters of personality disorders. Cluster A includes paranoid personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, and schizotypical personality disorder. Cluster B is antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, which is the one I'm going to focus on, and historic personality disorder. Cluster C includes avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and obsessive compulsive type. Our textbook by I always say this wrong. Our textbook by Dizbolsky says there are also some other ones, but they are likely caused by medical conditions. So again, I'm going to focus on narcissistic personality disorder, and from here out, I'm going to be referring to it as NPD. So on slide number 3, some of the history we have here is that as far back as even in Greek mythology, there are issues of people having what we would call today NPD, but at that time it was just called narcissism. When we think about the story of Narcissus, which is, the tale of how he was a young man kind of lost in the woods and got stuck in self-admiration, which led him to trouble. We jump into the 1900s, and psychoanalysts bring out more distinct definitions, but not the final definitions of what NPD is going to be. We then jump to 1911, when Otto Rank is considered to have the earliest written definition and the earliest account on issues of what he calls self-admiration and vanity disorder, or having issues with self-admiration and vanity, not exactly a disorder yet. We then go to 1914 with Sigmund Freud started to work on what we now call NPD, and at that time it was in a paper he called On Narcissism, an Introduction. He again, as he usually does, connects with issues of libido. We go to the 1950s and 1960s, where the disorder of NPD comes to more light and we get more actual definitions. In 1967, Otto Kernberg describes NPD as narcissistic personality structure, and he explains actually that in his theory there are 3 types, which are normal adult narcissisms, normal infantile narcissisms, and more of what we see today with NPD as being pathological narcissism that comes into effect in different ways in a client's life to hinder them. So by 1967, Heinz Kaupt works off some of the ideas that Freud had earlier, and then he actually comes up with the term for narcissistic personality disorder and definitions of what we use today. And then it wasn't until 1980 that NPD was officially listed in the DSM-3 at the time. And little changes have been made to the current version all the way to what we have in the DSM-5. Okay, so slide number 3. Now we're going to go to slide number 4. I'm sorry, I'm talking to myself in this too. So the assessment process is that really there is no specific testing or lab testing, like no blood test, biological test. However, we know that we can use other clinical assessments and formats to be helpful, such as using what I use now in my current job is like a self-harm assessment, a suicidal ideation assessment, threat or risk to others assessments, as well as looking into like mood state assessments to just kind of see where your client is and how that correlates to NPD or other personality disorders. So again, according to our textbook, it's important to assess for depression with NPD and personality disorders because depression, as well as a past history of sexual abuse, can play a big role in the current way that NPD is presenting. Sexual abuse can actually be a cause in some theories for developing NPD. So the way that we get this information is kind of hard because it generally would come from the clients self-reporting when they have come to a point in their lives when they need help, and as well as maybe close individuals such as a spouse, family members, close friends, if they would allow that into the assessment process and into their treatment process. All of the DSM criteria, of course, must be met, which we'll go into a little later for the DSM criteria. So some other issues to look for with a person that has NPD is that they are showing exaggerated sense of self-importance. They have exaggerated fantasies about power and wealth or dominance, and they hold general ideas that they are special, but there's no evidence for a belief as such as, I can give an example, like, a person comes to an entry-level job and believes that, right away they should be the manager because they know better than everybody. They can do the work better when in reality that's may not be the case. Other symptoms to look for, again, are inflated sense of entitlements, manipulation of others for personal gain, complete or very high lacking of empathy and remorse, high levels of arrogance, inflated sense of enviousness over almost nothing. These symptoms must have been prevalent over a course of time, although it's not really listed anywhere I can find a set time frame, but it's a pervasive feature of, the way that they get along with others is that they have these exaggerated issues of importance. They use manipulation, they're self-entitled, and especially when they're getting along even with their own family and interpersonal relationships, romantic relationships with friends, they just really can't seem to get along with other people. Another thing I wanted to mention is that it is important to note that a client can meet criteria for more than one personality disorder at a time, and according to the DSM-5, if that happens, they should actually be diagnosed with multiple disorders. We also need to look for aspects of mania and hypomania, as mood state during episodes can point to other disorders that may not be a personality disorder. Issues of hypomania or mania or lack thereof could also point to a substance issue. So substance use needs to be ruled out as a cause of symptoms. So it's likely that the prevalence for people that have NPD, I couldn't find a discernible amount, but what I did find was that it's likely that 1 in 10 people have a diagnosable personality disorder of some kind. So, the main issue, according to our textbook, by, I always say it wrong, by Dizwelski, is that the defining issue with any personality disorder is that the individual who suffers from a personality disorder will report significant distress or impairment in social functioning, which is usually how they come into contact with needing help, because they're just really, they're having such issues functioning in social situations, like, for instance, going to Thanksgiving dinner or keeping jobs because they just can't get along. So I'm going to read off the criteria. The criteria from the DSM is that a pervasive pattern of grandiosity and fantasy and behavior, need for admiration and lack of empathy, beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more quality. So the first one is has a grandiose sense of self-importance, and the example given is they exaggerate achievements and talents, expect to be recognized as superior without consumer achievement. That kind of goes back to what I said about, a person starting an entry-level job and right away they're angry because they haven't gotten promoted in 2 weeks. Number 2 is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. And then often when those fantasies don't come true with the person that they think they're going to, it causes them distress. Number 3, believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special people or in high status people or institutions, again, with no evidence for that. Number 4 is they require excessive admiration, and as well as what can go along with that is they're extremely sensitive to criticism and lack of admiration. They're extremely sensitive to being told that they're doing something wrong or hurting other people, which goes into lack of empathy. Number 5 is has a sense of entitlement. Example, with unreasonable expectations or especially favorable treatments or automatic compliance with his or her expectations, which that can go into, again, with romantic issues is you're in a romantic relationship, say you have, you and your partner should be reciprocal. Those are not one-way relationships. It's not supposed to be that the one person makes all the rules and has all admiration and everything is for that person. So human interactions are reciprocal. Number 6 is interpersonally exploitive. Example, takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own ends, which kind of goes into the manipulation factors that they kind of will do what they need to do as long as their needs are met with lack of empathy. Number 7 is lack of empathy and is unwilling to recognize or identify with feelings or needs of others. So again, when they're walking all over everybody to get what they want or their needs met, even going into talking about how sometimes with cheating because they feel that they're not being emotionally satisfied or sexually satisfied, and they're unconcerned with how that their partner feels about that, and often do not understand why a partner is angry for being cheated on. It sounds a little bit funny, but it's true. Number 8 is often envious of others or belief that others are envious of him or her, again with little supportive evidence for that. Number 9 shows arrogant, haughty behaviors and attitudes. So again, like a key feature of some of these issues is that with all these things that I just talked about is their emotions and their behaviors are erratic and intense. So erratic and intense behavior makes it difficult for them to develop lasting associations with other people, such as, again, in romantic relationships or with their own family. It's pretty hard to deal with someone that, constantly has a problem because you're not doing what they want and they're not getting what they want, or they're walking all over you just to get their needs met. This type of behavior hinders a person with NPD or even other personality disorders because they're not able to sustain friendships or romances or jobs. They lack an understanding of how or why their own actions and behaviors cause others to avoid them or to cut them off. And they're often, again, very sensitive to that criticism or to that lack of contact and don't understand why. So again, there's no specific time frame given, and I kind of don't like that because it just leaves too much open questioning for me, I guess. So the basic criteria is that it involves a long-term pattern of interpersonal experience and behavior that differs strikingly from the expectations of the individual's culture. So with that being, we're going to go into the next slide, which is cultural factors. Now, cultural factors are important here because, especially when we go, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but if you're in a, like, say, a collectivist type culture, like maybe like our Western culture in the United States is pretty individualistic. So some of the issues of the way, the everyday American kind of operates on thinking about themselves first is not seen as an issue in our culture, but it may be seen as an issue in a collectivist culture. So we need to look into that background to see if this behavior is normal or not. There is literature that points there's different contributing factors, such as environment the person is raised in, especially from a young age. Evidence saying that neglectful parenting or even overparenting can cause one to develop a personality disorder. More so with the neglectful parenting leading to NPD. Males have a higher prevalence to develop NPD. Where's my statistic on that one? So I read that males have a 50 to 70% higher disorder rates than of females. The age of onset is usually early adolescence, so teenagers or early 20s, but it has been known to show up a little earlier than that. Again, in Western cultures, NPD is more prevalent, and this is maybe because as our Western societies are more concerned with individual versus group needs. That's just kind of how we operate and are raised. It's been shown that there's been an increase in Western societies having personality disorders. And in an article I read by Vitar Moritz and I can't say the last one, Winolpe in 2008 showed that, in a study that was done in 1963, the rates of a person just making narcissistic statements, not necessarily that they have a narcissistic disorder, a personality disorder, but making narcissistic statements was 12%. And then by 1992, when the study was done again, that had increased to 77 to 88% of people polled, I guess, had a prevalence rate of making narcissistic statements. So there's some evidence pointing to that this disorder is a younger person's disorder because as one ages and goes into old age, supposedly self-esteem becomes less important. Again, though, that's just a theory that may not be true for all. There's a genetic predisposition. So if a parent or other close relative has a personality disorder or even another mental health disorder, they're then at a predisposition to develop one themselves. Again, so culture and society plays a role. I've said this, I think, 3 times, but it's very important to me to understand that the background that an individual comes from, such as their home life, their neighborhood, their religion, things like that, the culture that you're raised in. If you're raised in a culture that is you're supposed to think about everybody, not just yourself, having these kind of symptoms is a really big problem in that person's culture, and it can cause them great deals of distress. Whereas, because I'm an American, I'm just going to use American culture as an example. Where I'm raised, I'm taught to kind of look out for myself first and then others later. So some of these issues that I do even will not be seen as a problem here, but if I was to go into a different culture, it may be seen as a big problem. So this is going to take us down into, let's see, so some of the risk factors. Again, so a big risk factor I want to talk about is that there's been pretty good research stating that NPD especially and other personality disorders may develop out of reactions to guarding against perceived lack of love and emotional pain. That would go back into some of the cultural issue of how are you raised if you were being raised neglectfully or, maybe with helicopter parenting over raised. You just feel kind of trapped. So maladaptive personality traits and coping styles could also have been learned as they have maybe seen that their parents, caregivers, or other close people in their life as they're growing up have used maladaptive and manipulative ways for their own personal gain. There's a big comorbidity for substance abuse issues, as well as developing other mental health issues, especially depression. There's a higher prevalence of people with NPD for self-harm and suicide risk. If untreated, interpersonal relationships will continue to be an issue throughout life. However, as we know, that can change, with treatment, medication, different things that may change. There's a higher health risk for people that have NPD because they're kind of, part of that sense of entitlement, sense of superiority may lead them to kind of ignore health problems for too long. And by the time they go and take care of it, it's a big health problem, not just a little one. Again, so I'm going to talk about the theory that NPD could have formed as a protective and maladaptive measure to protect from early childhood perceptions of being unloved or in pain. This goes again back into some of the assessments about assessing for early childhood abuse, especially sexual abuse. They could have kind of formed these maladaptive theories of their own, and this is how they get along in life now. So that's an important factor to look for. Okay, and then so when we go into ethical factors, so for ethical factors, it's important to correctly assess and diagnose. Again, as I stated earlier, some personality disorders can overlap, and it is possible to have more than one at a time. And if you have more than one at a time, they all need to be getting treated properly. So we don't want to undertreat we don't want to undertreat one disorder because we're not looking at it and we're looking at NPD instead of someone that has multiple disorders. They may have depression disorder as well, some anxiety issues, other things that can go into place. So it is possible to have more than one mental health disorder at a time when you have a personality disorder. Once given a diagnosis, this person carries that stigma with them, and this brings me to an important point with legal matters and court cases. So some research that I had did was according to an article by Cunningham and Reading in 1998. They make a statement that stands out to me, which is that personality disorders, by definition, reflect pervasive and unremitting maladaptive symptoms, significantly interfering or causing marked subjective distress. However, that brings into question for me, if I'm going to if I'm going to diagnose and label somebody with this disorder and they're facing prison time, jail time, legal fees, anything that has to do with the court, I mean, even as far as if they're facing issues with losing their children or having, they're in the middle of a divorce and they're having parental rights questioned, the disorder can change. Disorders do change. They are not constant, but the definition that goes with this is that it's pervasive and unremitting. So I would question, very heavily thinking about the person in front of me and their lifespan and the things that they're going to have to deal with before I would just go with a disorder. It would be heavy-handed for me, like meaning that very much took into consideration this person's life, their cultures, everything surrounding them that might lead to one having NPD. So again, we know too, as someone gets older, supposedly NPD and self-esteem become less of an issue. But if they're marked medically, on in their medical charts that they have a personality disorder, could this hinder them later on in life from being taken into like a nursing home or something? Those are just things that we need to think about when we do this. So we need to make sure that we know why we're diagnosing somebody and the proper criteria of that. So that goes into treatment. Excuse me 1 second. I do have notes on that. I lost my notes. Okay, well, I'll just go ahead. So for treatments, according to medicalnewstoday.com, specific treatments are to bring about a change in attitudes, resulting in more consumer behavior. It can help a person build up self-esteem and acquire realistic expectations of themselves and others. So what that means is that these treatments are meant to help them learn how to get along with others in society, basically. Learn how to get along with their family, perhaps learn how to get along with their spouse or significant other, which would then go into, they can go to individual therapy or group therapy. Often, if the person is part of a couple or married, couples therapy, it helps them to learn how to find that empathy, or maybe see where they're having the issues and not having that empathy, and considering the other person that they're trying to keep around. There's a possibility of inpatient care being needed because some individuals, through this erratic type of behavior, could become dangerous to themselves or others, because again, they're extremely sensitive to criticism. So if they're getting told by their family, hey, I think you have a problem getting along with people, we're always having this issue with you, that could quickly turn to danger to self or others. At times, medications need to be used, which would be antidepressants, antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers. Those again are to kind of help deal with some of the symptoms. Perhaps the anxiety that may be associated with some of these symptoms. The mood stabilizers, as they're getting extremely critical of the criticism that they're getting, is that bringing them to a low mood and they're having a hard time coming out of that depression stage. Those are just things that they may need help with. So all the treatments are specifically to target issues with their lack of empathy and issues in finding and holding intimacy with other people. Some would say that people with NPD, they just don't know. They kind of don't see anybody but themselves, which is where the issues come in. If they show no empathy or remorse for their actions, which leads significant others, family, friends, jobs, to just not want anything to do with them, and that is hurtful to them and hindering their lives. So the last slide I want to talk about is on some special considerations, I think especially for spouses. This one is a little personal to me because of some things that have happened in my life. So I really took a big look at this. So a person with NPD could be very controlling. They could be very egotistical. They're frequently overly critical and unsatisfied with their relationships and partners. They're prone to blaming the family or significant other for even the slightest of issues with no evidence for such a reason. They lose their temper easily, which then could lead to them being potentially physically, emotionally, and sexually abusive at times. So again, those treatments are meant to help these areas be more under control so that they're able to have, the life that they want and be successful in life. So I hope everybody enjoyed my presentation. Again, I am sorry that it was late. My apologies. If there's any questions about anything, please ask away. Thank you. Have a nice night.